Why did God create Adam before Eve? The question of why God created Adam before Eve has intrigued scholars, theologians, and philosophers for centuries. While it may appear to be a simple detail within the religious narratives of creation, this sequence carries significant interpretative weight across multiple disciplines, including theology, religious history, anthropology, and sociology. Understanding this topic requires examining the historical context of sacred texts, the evolution of interpretive traditions, and the broader implications for human society. From a strictly historical perspective, the creation narratives involving Adam and Eve originate primarily from the book of Genesis in the Hebrew Bible, also reflected in the Christian Old Testament. Genesis presents two accounts of creation that differ in sequence and emphasis. In the first account, God creates humanity in a general sense, male and female, on the sixth day. In the second account, a more detailed narrative introduces Adam first, placing him in the Garden of Eden before creating Eve as a companion. Scholars have long debated why the second account emphasizes Adam's primacy. This distinction in textual structure has led to numerous interpretations over millennia, each shaped by cultural, linguistic, and philosophical factors. The linguistic and cultural context of the Hebrew text itself offers insights. In Hebrew, the word used for man in Genesis, Adam, can denote both humanity in general and specifically a male individual. Some scholars suggest that placing Adam first reflects a grammatical convention rather than a strict hierarchy, emphasizing the emergence of humanity in a sequential manner for narrative clarity. The text describes God forming Adam from the dust of the ground and then breathing life into him, establishing the archetype of humankind. Eve's creation from Adam's rib, as later described, situates her as a complement to Adam rather than an independent creation, suggesting an early attempt to conceptualize relational dynamics between genders. Historically, interpretations of Adam's primacy were influenced by the social and philosophical frameworks of the time. In ancient Near Eastern societies, male-centered social structures were common, and theological narratives often mirrored prevailing cultural norms. Some historians argue that the depiction of Adam first reflects a patriarchal worldview, projecting human social hierarchies onto divine action. This does not necessarily indicate theological intent but illustrates how sacred texts were shaped within their historical milieu. The order of creation may have functioned as a means of explaining or reinforcing existing gender roles, reflecting not only spiritual but also sociocultural concerns. Philosophically, the primacy of Adam raises questions about the nature of humanity, relationality, and ethics. Many scholars in the medieval and early modern periods considered Adam's precedence to symbolize the logical or ontological foundation of humanity. Adam, as the first individual, represents the initial point of human consciousness, moral awareness, and accountability. Eve's subsequent creation emphasizes relationality. Humans are inherently social and interdependent beings. The sequence thus illustrates a conceptual framework in which individual existence precedes social and relational complexity, highlighting the interplay between autonomy and community in human experience. Theological interpretations vary significantly across different traditions. In Judaism, Adam is often understood as the first prophet or the archetype of humanity, whose actions and choices establish moral and ethical precedents. The rabbis of the Talmudic period debated the significance of Eve's creation from Adam, sometimes suggesting that the narrative underscores partnership, mutual dependence, and shared responsibility rather than superiority. In early Christian thought, Church fathers such as Augustine and Jerome interpreted Adam's creation before Eve as establishing a moral hierarchy, arguing that man's primacy explained the theological rationale for male headship in familial and ecclesiastical structures. Over time, these interpretations influenced Western religious culture, shaping gendered moral philosophy and social organization. In Islam, the Quranic narrative presents Adam and Eve together in a slightly different context. While the sequence of creation is sometimes interpreted as Adam preceding Eve, the emphasis is more on the joint accountability of humanity. Islamic scholars discuss Adam's precedence not as a sign of superiority, but as the starting point for human life and the unfolding of divine guidance. Eve's role, like Adam's, emphasizes the mutual responsibility of human beings in upholding moral principles. This comparative perspective demonstrates that while the sequence is noted, the interpretive significance can differ widely depending on theological tradition and cultural lens. Linguistic analysis and comparative textual studies further illuminate the significance of Adam's primacy. In some ancient Near Eastern creation myths, such as those from Mesopotamia, humans are created from clay or divine substances, sometimes in pairs, sometimes sequentially. The Hebrew narrative's choice to describe Adam first may reflect literary conventions inherited from these broader mythological traditions. Scholars argue that this sequence serves a didactic function, presenting the emergence of humanity in a logical progression. An individual is established, the environment is prepared, and relational complementarity follows. By situating Adam first, the narrative provides a clear starting point for subsequent theological, moral, and social developments. The sequence of Adam before Eve also carries implications for understanding human history and anthropology. In early interpretations, some scholars proposed that Adam symbolizes the emergence of human consciousness and culture. By emphasizing Adam's initial creation, the narrative may encode a reflection on the development of human identity, labor, and stewardship. Adam is placed in the garden with responsibilities, including naming animals and managing the environment, suggesting that the first human embodies the ethical and practical dimensions of civilization. Eve's creation then introduces relational, reproductive, and communal aspects, indicating that humanity's survival and flourishing require both individual agency and collaborative partnership. Gender studies and modern interpretations provide further insight. Contemporary scholarship often critiques historical interpretations that use Adam's precedence to justify social hierarchies. Feminist theologians argue that reading Adam as inherently superior reflects cultural biases rather than textual necessity. Some propose that the narrative sequence should be understood symbolically rather than hierarchically. Adam represents the human being in abstract form, while Eve represents relationality, interdependence, and the shared dimensions of life. This perspective emphasizes complementarity, cooperation, and moral partnership rather than domination or priority of one gender over another. Anthropologically, the narrative reflects early human attempts to explain differences and similarities between men and women. By situating Adam first, the text foregrounds human distinctiveness from the natural world. The subsequent creation of Eve underscores continuity and shared essence, suggesting that all humans derive from a common source. This interpretation has influenced cultural conceptions of lineage, kinship, and social organization across civilizations. The idea of a shared origin shapes ethical frameworks and legal traditions, particularly regarding inheritance, social roles, and communal responsibility. The debate about the order of creation also touches on philosophical questions of identity and consciousness. Some philosophers interpret Adam's precedence as indicating the primacy of individual awareness before relational identity. In other words, one must exist as a conscious agent before forming meaningful connections with others. This interpretation aligns with certain existentialist and ethical theories, which propose that moral and social understanding develops through the interplay of individual agency and relational engagement. Eve's creation, in this sense, represents the expansion of ethical and social consciousness beyond the individual, marking the beginning of complex human interaction. Archaeological and historical evidence, while not directly confirming the biblical sequence, provides context for understanding how early societies perceived human origins. Studies of ancient Near Eastern settlements, ritual practices, and mythologies reveal that early civilizations often emphasized male figures as founders or progenitors, reflecting broader social and economic realities. The depiction of Adam as the initial human may reflect this tendency, while Eve's emergence situates her within the broader social order. Understanding these cultural and historical frameworks allows scholars to appreciate how sacred texts both influence and are influenced by societal norms. The symbolic interpretation of Adam and Eve further enriches understanding. In many traditions, Adam symbolizes the abstract concept of humanity, mortality, and ethical responsibility, while Eve represents relationality, fertility, and the continuity of life. The sequential creation can thus be read as a conceptual model. Humans emerge first as individuals capable of moral choice, and then as partners capable of sustaining life and community. This reading emphasizes ethical, social, and cultural dimensions rather than literal biological priority. The impact of this interpretation on human history is notable. The theological and philosophical significance of Adam's primacy has shaped legal systems, moral codes, and social structures throughout centuries. In Western societies, for example, interpretations of Genesis influenced the development of patriarchal norms, marriage practices, and family hierarchies. In contrast, alternative readings in Jewish and Islamic traditions often focus on moral partnership and shared responsibility, demonstrating that the narrative's implications are contingent upon interpretive frameworks. The sequence has therefore played a role not only in religious thought but also in the structuring of human societies. Modern scholarship continues to explore the question with interdisciplinary approaches. Linguists, historians, theologians, anthropologists, and gender studies scholars examine the narrative from multiple angles. Some propose that focusing on Adam first was a literary strategy to introduce moral and ethical principles through a singular archetype. Others emphasize the symbolic rather than literal meaning of sequence, suggesting that the narrative intends to convey complementary human roles rather than superiority. This ongoing debate illustrates the enduring relevance of the question, which continues to shape theological reflection and social discourse. The discussion also intersects with contemporary ethical and philosophical concerns. Questions about human origin, gender complementarity, and relationality inform debates on bioethics, human rights, and social justice. By examining the sequence in a neutral, scholarly manner, one can appreciate the narrative's influence on concepts such as accountability, cooperation, and moral responsibility. Adam's precedence, viewed through this lens, is not simply a historical or religious fact but a point of entry into discussions about human nature and societal development. Finally, the creation of Adam before Eve offers a lens for examining the broader dynamics of human thought. It illustrates how ancient texts encode ethical, social, and philosophical concepts within seemingly simple narratives. The sequence prompts reflection on the relationship between individual agency and communal life, between moral consciousness and relational responsibility. By engaging with this question through historical, linguistic, theological, and anthropological perspectives, one gains a deeper understanding of how early humanity sought to explain its existence and social order. In conclusion, the question of why God created Adam before Eve is complex, multifaceted, and historically significant. It is rooted in the textual structure of Genesis, influenced by ancient Near Eastern literary conventions, and interpreted differently across Jewish, Christian, and Islamic traditions. Historical and cultural contexts reveal that the sequence reflects social norms, ethical principles, and philosophical concepts rather than merely a literal biological order. Theological interpretations have varied, emphasizing everything from hierarchical relationships to ethical partnership. Modern scholarship encourages symbolic and contextual readings, highlighting complementarity, relationality, and shared human responsibility. Understanding this sequence allows for insight into the development of moral thought, social organization, and human identity, demonstrating that even seemingly small details in sacred texts can have profound implications for humanity's intellectual and cultural history. By focusing on verified historical data, linguistic analysis, philosophical interpretations, and cross-cultural perspectives, this exploration illustrates that Adam's precedence serves multiple functions. It introduces humanity, situates relational dynamics, and frames moral and social responsibility. The impact of this narrative extends beyond religious discourse, influencing human understanding of identity, ethics, and society for millennia. Ultimately, examining why Adam was created before Eve offers not only historical and theological insight but also a window into the evolving human attempt to comprehend existence, morality, and the interdependence of life.